Hopefully people can hear us. I don't know. They'll let us know.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Motion Design Hotline. Thanks, y'all, for coming out and hanging out with us and spending some time with us here on the Friday to bring us your After Effects troubles, and we're gonna try to solve them. Welcome
Is
to
it
your.
Friday?
I'm afraid so, Kyle.
Oh boy.
The weekend's coming up strong on you. So it's we're losing all sense of time and direction around here. But it is Friday when we do this. 1 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock West Coast time. I don't know.
Or if you're one of the coolest people, noon central.
It's if you're one of those middle folk, it's Moon Central. Well, hey, we're in the middle of it. So if you have any questions about After Effects motion design, hit us up in the chat. We wanna hear them. We want to try to solve them live. But every episode, we try to kick it off with someone who has used our form, our preferred way of getting us early questions, the Google form. That's available in the description. So if you want to send some things for next episode, you put it in there. It's kind of like long form, more involved things. Put them in there. But if you have any questions today, put them in the chat because we're with you right now. Let's do it.
We're here.
So we're gonna
happening.
it's happening now. Kyle, I don't know. What have you been up to today?
Mostly I made myself breakfast and I sent some emails, and then this. That's it. So far,
I
really.
do often forget because of our time difference. You haven't been doing things all day today.
I mean, it's noon. I feel like I should
right.
have done more than that, but that's what I did.
Whatever. Well,
Yeah.
What was our question? What were we working on? What was
Conveniently enough, I have it in front of me because I did manage to organize our Millinote board as well.
That's right. We finally got organized today.
So I do have a question from katzlancer.
Yeah.
I did not find this person on Twitter, so I'm not sure where that username originates from. But I just don't understand how to make lines connected to shapes and animate them the way this video does. Link. At the 1 minute-ish mark. And I'll go ahead and post that link in the chat just for anyone who did not check that out already.
Right.
Boom. Is it particular or just shape repeaters, or how do they do the whole animation with the line circles there? And then they were also asking about the next little bit at 108, where a couple circles kind of separate with a little bit of a liquidy vibe.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have it up on your screen? Like, let's bounce to that and see.
Oh yeah, you know what? I actually downloaded it. I know, because I thought that would probably be helpful.
Right. So we can kind of go through it, maybe analyze a little bit of what. So this is the Apple spot from 2014, 2016.
Yeah, I think 2014 is probably based on the Vimeo date.
Very contemporary, right? And this is. For anyone, I think I remember when this came out and there's like a big rash of people who were like, oh, let's get abstract. Let's do like this. I want one now, as it goes. But I think this sparked a lot of people's thoughts about like, oh, we could just use circles to be things.
Yep. Mobile.
For
those of you who attended Blend this year.
And like, I get that it is like there's a lot of things here that are like how does a thing become thing? How does this turn into this? How does any of this work? And we're because this has shown up in my inbox a lot of times since then, and we're gonna
the spot they were asking about here.
Okay, so we're gonna try to demystify some of this.
And obviously we're doing this without the sound effects, but the sound is a big part of what happens there. So that little bit there was the part they were asking about. We can go ahead and, see the rest though, because this whole thing's pretty good. Even 6 years later, it's a solid spot.
Yeah, and it's one of these pieces that kind of became very zeitgeisty at the time, right? And it still pervades a lot of what people think about when you say, "Oh, what's motion design?" Well, it's this, right? Because you can just point to it and
balls and lines mostly.
Yeah, mostly lines and balls. That's mostly lines and circles, So yeah, the part they were asking about was like these lines connecting to this middle thing, and then that middle thing moves, and then the lines become like threads and they snap. I guess was the question. And then what was the other one? What was the 108 section that they were on? They were going about
The little separation here in just a second. This little whoop. That.
Turn into a line. Right.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, you and I both had some theories. We had some thoughts, some deep thoughts about these, and we'll see. We'll see if we can speculate about how we would have done it.
Right.
Right.
And how we do it now, because there are tools available today that weren't available at the time.
Yeah, like 6 years ago, there are a lot of plugins that didn't exist. There are a lot of even vanilla things in After Effects that didn't exist. So
yeah,
we're gonna get into it. I don't know. You might as well. We're on your screen right now. We might as well have a look at that.
Sure. I know that Evan's going to chat a little bit about some of the, maybe a little higher level things that are going on here. But I kind of focused on a couple just direct techniques here. So I really like to do things procedurally. Also, one of the first things I did was just took the spot and used some markers to like kind of look at the parts that I wanted to see. So I specifically focused on this little like twang here when the pieces are pulling away. And then on this little blobby apart bit. So I have a couple approaches to both of those that are both procedural, or as procedural as they can be. So I did a bit with just a shape layer here for this line. I'll do a quick preview. Bing. And, some of these have strengths and weaknesses, but if you're looking to do this procedurally, you're going to have to kind of make some trade-offs sometimes. But it also means that, like, if you need to do 40 lines like this, that becomes a lot easier than, just doing it by hand, which might be possible if you have like 3 or 4. So I'll do this from scratch too, just to talk through it. And I'll go ahead and turn off my layer controls. Just kind of step through this so you can see what's happening. I think this one's pretty good. And, if you had quite a few of them and do it fast, I think it sells pretty well. Boop. So what I did here is I just drew a path and added a stroke to it. So this is just a straight line here. And then I added a wiggle paths and a trim paths. And then I've just keyframed a couple of properties here. So one thing I really wanted to point out, I know for a lot of people, shape layers are a little mysterious because there's so much going on, so much you can do. And all these effectors that are over here in the add group, one thing I really wanted to point out, especially about all these things at the bottom, is the order that you apply them really matters. So notice here, I've got wiggle paths and then a trim paths. And so what's happening is that path it's just a straight line path. It's being wiggled and then trimmed, okay? So if I flip these, if I put the trim paths first, it's being trimmed and then wiggled. And look at what a different result you get.
That's a real shrivelly string you got there.
Yeah,
Kyle.
yeah. Bing. So, maybe that's a result you want. But just to point out that that's kind of how those work here. So obviously I've got some specific settings here that I just kind of found by dialing in. But I'll make just a new line here. And it looks like I've got a stroke already. I can just get rid of the fill. I'm going to add a wiggle paths, which, ding, really that stroke can be anywhere. Not a big deal. So the thing about wiggle paths, by default, it's kind of spiky like that. You can just turn that to smooth. And then it's really just a matter of kind of like dialing in your amount of detail here. I'm just going to kind of like ballpark it here. If you don't like that one, just mess with the random seed until you get one you do like.
Yeah.
I'll say that. Great.
If you don't like it, keep hitting the button.
Yeah. Personally, with all these kind of built-in wigglers, I tend to, if I just let this go, you see it's set to wiggles per second right now, so it'll wiggle itself, okay? Let's go ahead and just get rid of that other one for a second. But I don't usually like that. I don't really like the control that I have there. So I like to animate one of the phases instead, because it kind of gives you a little bit more control. And if you, depending on which one you use, you can kind of make things flow along the line a little better. And the correlation also can be really helpful here. You can kind of decide how, if you take it to 100, everything's totally correlated, which means no wiggles. Or you can, upper numbers like this, you get a nice, like kind of simile, kind of nice wavy, but still sort of coherent thing. So what I did is I keyframed the size property from 0 to something. So that's kind of like when it twangs, it goes bing, and you get a little bit of that, right? What else did I? Oh, this spatial phase, just to kind of like give it some movement as it goes. So we'll do that real quick too. And I just kind of finesse these keyframes until I was happy with them, right? So bing, something like that gives it a nice, I don't like that it's getting so much over here, but we'll deal with that. So I was pretty happy with that. And then I just added a trim path so that we can retract it that way. And whoop, there we go. Turn off my layer control so you can see. I just keyframe that from 0 to 100. And bing, you see we've got the right idea here. Just finesse your keyframes a little bit. And worked out pretty nicely. There's just one of them. Just to kind of see it in context, here are 3 of them with just like some slight timing offsets and stuff so you can kind of see it a little better. Bing. And, each of them has just a slightly different random seed, so they look a little bit, more organic, a little different. And I thought those looked pretty nice. One thing I noticed on the actual one, is there was just a little touch of a taper on the ends, which I couldn't get through shape layers. But I noticed if you turned on motion blur, it actually did that pretty nicely. I also thought it might be interesting to try this with a displacement map, which while procedural might be a little finicky for, something where you're doing a lot of this, but you could certainly rig this up with some expressions and whatnot. So just to show you what's going on here, I have a rectangle with a gradient here. And we talked about displacement mapping a while ago on here, and we talked about it a bit when Greg was on, because he's done quite a bit of this using displacement maps to wiggle a line. So that's exactly what we're doing here. So this gradient, we're not going to see it, but the black and white values are going to determine how offset this thing is, okay? 50% gray means no displacement, and then white and black are the extremes. So let's go ahead, just so you can kind of see what's going on. I also blurred it quite a bit to really soften it, but let me kind of show you what's happening here. I'll turn on my displacement map effect, so you can see what's going on here. And again, I kind of keyframed this from 0 up to a higher value, and see how it's really chunky there? Let me turn that off. That's because we've got kind of a hard fall off. So I just applied a blur, pretty big blur horizontally, and that softens it right up. And again, I used motion blur to get just a little bit of that. You can see, if you get in close here, you do have a little bit of like kind of pixely business. So you'd probably need to clean that up a little bit with some effects. But I did think the end result of this was pretty nice. You got a nice kind of like waviness in this. I'm also scaling this gradient a bit so it kind of sticks with the thread as it winds up. So, I don't know if this is the most usable, but it's an option.
Yeah. Hey, that's what we do here. We can present you with options. What you do with it is your own problem.
And then me being me, I decided to do this with a text layer too, because I knew that you could. One thing I really like about that both of these, or the wiggle paths falls down on, is you cannot restrict, you can't make it so that this end of the line doesn't wiggle.
Right.
Okay. You totally can with the displacement map. There we go. Notice that like this end of the line stays straight, which feels to me more realistic. And you can do that with text. I'm not going to go super into this because I have a tutorial that goes over this. I'll post the link here. It's my School of Motion, creatively using text animators in After Effects. Yeah, of course, Chris. I mean, you knew. Come on.
You know how we do on this show.
So I will kind of talk you through what's happening here. Not that much, honestly. So it's just a straight line, and you could do this with any of them, but I went ahead and used the, where is it? Create nulls from paths script that just comes with After Effects,
right,
and would not have existed at the time the spot was made. But now it makes it really easy to take a mask path or a shape path, and you can just connect those to nulls. And so it'd be real easy to like parent that up to the dot, right? So this is just a bunch of periods here. And I have a little bit of a rig that I built that, again, you can see in one of those tutorials exactly how I built it. There's a retract here that's pretty straightforward. it's just a scale to 0. So actually the dots exist the whole way. Turn off those layer controls. They're just starting to scale to 0, so they become invisible. Okay. And then there's a second animator here that I called wave, which has a range selector this one has a position property going up to 300. So the range selector makes it so that because it's on ramp, this end is not getting affected at all. So I can give it this real nice like fall off to, way wavy and not wavy at all. Then I fed it a wiggly selector that would turn this into more of a wave. Bing. And I can post this project file too. You can pick it apart. The thing I really liked about this is while not exactly the same as the Apple thing, it gave it this really nice kind of ribbony look at the end, just because the way I built this, where you kind of get some thickness and almost a little bit of like 3D look, like it's twisting a bit too. And I really like that. You got this nice kind of feathery ping motion that's a little more like wavy than theirs was, but I thought that was pretty neat.
Sweet. Oh, that's good. Well, here, let me show you what I brought
Please
to the
do.
table for that. Before we move on to the other section, I want to just have a little compare and contrast for us. So I ended up being like, well, I should just try to build the whole. I should try to build the whole thing. I should try to do that because I try to link as much of it together as I can. And a lot of this, like we've got these things twang up, down, and granted, there's not as many, right? We could have done this with hundreds more. And to give you some context, this took about an hour this morning. So if I had 4 hours, I could do 4 times as many. Ooh. Anyway, at a certain point, it becomes just copying and pasting. But the idea here is, like you said, like we have the power to use the nulls to path situation. So all these nulls, they're locked to things using 2comp. These are really 3D things. And there's a crap pile of these nulls everywhere that I shy away. I just make them go away. I don't want to look at them. And so that's what's controlling the lines. That's what's causing the line to draw from one place to another. Now, the big question is when they start twanging, what's happening? Well, we don't actually twang them all. And I don't think they do in the Apple video either. A lot of them just kind of fade. They're just like, no, just adjust our opacity and go away. Goodbye. So there are just a few key ones that twang, right? That we can see their tails twang, twang, twang. Pew, pow, point. And that tells us these are twanging. And depending on the density, you probably need more or fewer. Like, what is the minimum number of twangs that I need to do in order for people to believe they're all twanging, right? How do we... what is the lower limit of that? So I ended up just doing 3 because I was kind of lazy today. But all these are doing, the lines are connected to here and to their home, right? So that line is not changing in any meaningful way. However, what I did a very similar thing to what you did. I dropped on a zigzag and a trim paths. So zigzag is really similar to your wiggle, except that it's regular, right? Zigzag produces a regular up-down change. I was going to say wave, but it's not really a wave. Like it looks wavy, but it's not like a sine wave or a cosine wave, right? Like if you change them to corner, then it's just jagged corners, so you can smooth out the corners. So we end up with this. And I just went through and like, well, that thing is only going to happen for like 4 frames, right? So I just set a keyframe and manually chose what I wanted to make this more or less extreme over those frames, adjusting the size of the zigzag and the number of ridges to make it more dramatic, less dramatic as we go. That's pretty much it. So each one of these is just doing that for a little bit at the end of its life and twanging away. The big thing that makes it work in what we would call the in the video in the example is that there's like a sound when we see the twang, and that tells us these things must be tension because and audio is a big driver of a lot of visuals. So a lot of the things that are kind of compelling in visuals are that, oh yeah, my mind is going to make up the rest of it, right? So that's kind of the space that we get into with that. So yeah, that was kind of my solution for this. Getting all these strings to attach. Like, you could use a plexus to do this.
Hmm.
You could use trying to think what are some of the other things. You might be using the beam effect. You might be using, in this case, the nulls to path situation and using the trim path. You could be using, maybe you use a Cinema 4D approach, that kind of thing. So that's how the thing goes down. Hopefully that kind of clears stuff up about how various ways to approach this. What's really interesting about the example video is I have a feeling that they didn't use anything in 3D at all. Just because they have, like, you can see really defined planes of, like, oh, these are foreground elements, these are mid, these are back, these are deep back, and they have them just various levels of blurred and lightened for each thing. Like, maybe they didn't use a 3D approach to this at all. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I could kind of see it. It almost feels like maybe they're just using varying thicknesses on the lines to imply depth.
Yeah, it's all a trick. If you learn anything from today's lesson, everything's a trick. They're all tricks. Like, it was just interesting. That video is a really big example of, like, things don't have to become things. We can just replace them with something, and then that's the thing, right? So that's kind of where that is. Because what was the second example? The second example was that blobulous becoming a line thing, right? And I think we each had a thing for that. Mine's pretty quick. Mine'll go by.
We'll do it. I mean, if we're already on you, then let's do it.
Okay. Well, I went back to heads momentarily, and then we.
Oh. Yeah. Yuck.
Sorry. But so. Chris in the chat said, "Oh yeah, there's a tutorial on the EC Abrams channel about it." Yes, there is.
There sure is.
But I'm showing a slightly different method here that uses only things internal to shape layers. This is what we would call the offset out, offset in, offset sandwich here. So we're using two offsets. So we got our geometry, right? We're getting our ellipses. I'm repeating that ellipse so that I get two ellipses, whatever. I'm putting a rectangle between them. Then I am merging them so that After Effects will treat all of this geometry as one thing. I don't know why I'm doing this. After Effects is going to grab it like a lobster and then put the sandwich in its mouth. And then I'm going to use the offset path to offset away and then clamp down. So we are offsetting out, and then we're clamping back down, and that causes this kind of tapering, this kind of blobbling, when you use, like, rounded joins on that. So this is going to smooth that stuff out using this method. And then we're able to, for example, keyframe the amounts of those offset paths to make that little trickery go away. And everything else is just keyframing the position of these things and their thickness to make it seem like some glorp. Which is, again, lovely trick. There's nothing liquid or strange about this, really. It's circle, circle, stick. And then we're just using that little bit of finesse to kind of glob it up. To make those things happen. But and then Kyle, you had another way to glob it up as well. So let's
again, not too dissimilar, but so I just took a look at it here, and it starts as a circle and it's drawing a line. They fade down there. They actually become slightly elongated towards the end, but I didn't worry too much about that because it's all about the globby here, right? So I went with a little bit more of an effects-based approach. But still certainly leaning on the shape layers here. So I used a circle. Let me turn off my repeater here. I used a circle and then a triangle shape here. You can see there's my polystar path with 3 points, aka a triangle. And you can see it if I zoom in here so that we'd have that little, like, tail bit. And it just scoots over a little bit. And then the triangle kind of tucks itself back inside. The whole thing scales down. And then I made the line a separate layer for reasons that will become clear in a minute. And then I gave this a repeater, which is one of my favorite shape layer effectors right here, repeater. And this is a great way to just do like a mirrored thing. You just use the repeater and tell it to make the scale -100. And then, be mindful about where the anchor point of that repeater is. But it's a good way to just kind of mirror something like that. Okay. Of course, the mirror effect works well too, which I actually did in another version of this. And you can see like that's pretty close already, but we're missing the globbies. So I tried 2 different effects recipes that I think both have their strengths here. So one of them, I use this a lot. If you do a fast blur, really, Gaussian blur, any kind of blur, we'll just like really chunk it up here. And then if you use the levels effect set to alpha, you can crunch that back in. And that's a really great way to do this kind of like, just soften the edges and glob everything together. You can see I just really, really crank that in and it just crisps those back up. So it does a nice job of kind of making this middle all nice and gluey here. But one thing that I did notice is, especially toward the ends here, if you look close, you can see we're losing a little bit of that circular shape. It's almost becoming a rounded square there. That may or may not, be an issue. It kind of depends on your use case. And then another one that I also tried was Roughen Edges. Does a lot of this itself. So you could do it with just one effect. This is actually very similar to the way Evan does it in his tutorial, because you can kind of really crunch the border in and determine the sharpness and the scale of it and stuff. And that's going to do a lot of this work just in one effect here, which is really nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting all the different kinds of looks you can get, right? Like for mine, like, do you need it to be like pixel perfect? Do you need it to be clear, right? And then, or do you need it to be more organic? Or do you even need it to be even more like rough and stuff? So you gotta kind of pick your method based on your look.
Very much so. And then again, this is a thing that you did just to kind of add this in as an option. This video is very clean. And while we do have a little bit of a liquidy thing here, still it's very crisp and very clean. But if you wanted to kind of glob it up a little bit more and give it a little bit more of a like cartoony punch here, obviously you'd need to kind of like keyframe that down at the end, because that's a little much in my opinion. But especially here at the beginning, that could be a really nice like whoop. If you have kind of a liquidy sound effect to go along with that and really help sell it, you can do some nice stuff there. And of course, the strength of doing these effects-based things like this, these are on adjustment layers, is that anything you put down here is going to be part of this. And so if this were a thing that you needed to use several times in the project, you don't need to be, you maybe don't need to do quite as much keyframing and manual setup if you just have this one layer that's kind of affecting everything beneath it. That's also why the line is its own layer above this, so that it's not getting blobbyized along with everything else. And then once again, because I'm me, I was like, hey, can I do this on one layer with text? And the answer is yes, pretty satisfyingly. If anything, I like it more. Again, you can kind of watch my text tutorial for the basics on creating a taper here. Let's turn a couple of these off real quick. So this is just a handful of dots. Boop, 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 there they are. And then I animated the tracking property. Bing, there it is. So that they would be really close together at first, and then they would get further apart, and then they would snap back together, okay? And then here, obviously, that's not what we want, so I created a taper as well by doing a scale animator with a ramp on it. Bing, and now we got that lovely teardrop shape that we're after. And you can tweak that with this ease high, ease low to really like crank that in if you want, see? And then I gave it an overall scale just to make it go away at the end so that it would bloop, disappear like it does there. Bloop. And then, so I'm actually only, let's close these up. I'm actually only doing just one side of this, right? So that's what it actually looks like raw. And then I fed it a couple effects to, again, there's that little fast box blur and levels to kind of globby that up. And then I also fed it a mirror so that it would just do that right in the layer itself. So I only need one of them, one set of keyframes, one thing to keep track of. And then a thing that I really like to do notice I did have a mask path here on this text layer that it's actually following. And then you could actually use a stroke effect after all these, so that they're not getting glorped up by the levels, to draw that line. Let me turn this back off. So, and then I animated the start and end properties there. So bloop, and then drawing that line on as well. So sometimes, doing everything on one layer, there's a reason for it. Sometimes it's just a fun thought experiment. But if this were a thing that you're going to need to do a lot, now this could be a preset because everything's right here in one place.
Perfect. Bueno. All right. So I guess that's it. Is that it for our pre things, I guess?
Probably.
All right. Well, hopefully that helps, and hopefully I hope that katzlancer watches this and that it answers their question.
I think maybe so you did touch on the trickery aspect of this, right?
Right.
And I think one thing to point out, because we just showed a variety of ways to approach these. One thing about After Effects and a lot of design-based programs is that often there are going to be maybe 3 different ways to do a thing that all looks the same.
Right.
And the question of which one is correct depends very much on what you need to do with it, how it needs to interact with the rest of the project, how controllable it needs to be. Again, if you saw our interview with Greg a couple weeks ago, we talked about this exact thing.
Which you should. You should watch the interview with Greg.
You should watch, yeah.
Go back, watch the replays. They're really good.
There are definitely times when, in the middle of a project, I've built something like this and been very impressed with myself, and then realized that's super cool, but ultimately it's not really the most usable for this particular scenario. So I'll keep that in my pocket for the future. But just to make that point, when possible, try to give yourself a little bit of time to play and explore like this and see what might actually be the best for what you need to do.
All right. Yeah. And I think that's a big theme that you and I talk about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Is this idea that there is no one perfect solution. There's no one solo only thing to do. So, hopefully that works. Let's see. We got some questions building up in the file. Not as many. If you got questions, get at us in the chat. We want to hear them. We had one question that was kind of about OBS related problems, but I think we knocked that out in the chat. If you're making tutorials like myself and Kyle, we make the toots, we do it. In terms of screen capture software and screen streaming stuff, we tend to just send the whole monitor, right? We just send the whole monitor, whatever that is. So we're using Wirecast for this. For example, Telestream, give us money. But so Wirecast, which is similar to OBS, which is similar to other things. We just share the entire monitor as a source, and then any window, anything that jumps up on that monitor is going to be moving along to get recorded. Similarly, I use Telestream's screen capture stuff, which is what is it called? I think it's just called ScreenFlow, which I use because it captures keyboard strokes and it captures, you can alter the size of your mouse afterwards, and you can do those little halos and stuff when you click on things that you can't really do if you're using OBS, which literally is just taking what's happening on the screen and moving it over. So that's sort of my take on those things. Now, granted, OBS is free, which makes it fantastic. It's
very usable. I know a lot of people do it. Ukramedia just gave another vote for OBS. I believe EJ uses OBS.
Yeah.
So it definitely has a big fan base.
And I'll say OBS is very resource light, right? So Wirecast is actually fairly resource heavy. ScreenFlow is a little bit resource heavy. So if you're doing big 3D stuff, if you're doing something that's going to take a lot of your resources already, then just be aware that that's more load on your system, which could end up giving you dropped frames. We've dropped 7 frames already today, Kyle. We'll never get those frames back. But if you're recording a tutorial, that could mean your audio goes at some point, and it could be at a critical moment. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So let's let's dive into the pile here. Let's jump in and see what's up. What do you got? What's going on?
So this is a very broad question, but because of one of the people that we have in the chat today, I thought I would address. You actually didn't grab who posted it, but how to start AE for beginners.
Right.
Which, there's a million answers for this. Some of them are better than others. But I just wanted to personally put a plug in for the School of Motion AE Kickstart course. It's, not free, but if you want to really jump in and learn AE really well from the basics, that's a really great course. Noel, who teaches the class, is here in the chat today. So
sweet.
Just thought I'd give that a plug. I TA'd for that for about a year and a half. So it's a great course, and I wish it existed when I was first learning After Effects. So
yeah, because it's interesting. So when we think about beginners coming to After Effects, the question I always ask is, what do you want to do with it? What brings you here? Because After Effects is so many things to so many people, right? For some people, it's for making motion graphics. For some people, it's doing visual effects. For some people, it's oh, I only want to make cool titles, or I only want to put lightsabers on things, And accomplishing things project by project kind of gives you these narrow, focused wedges into the program that will eventually build into a broader understanding. Starting from a broad, nebulous understanding is hard because you're well, why do I care about this, right? Why do these aspects appeal to me? They're not the thing I wanted to do. So
it's very much a Swiss Army knife, and there are people that have been using it every day for 10 years and haven't touched half the features in here because they've been using it as a compositing software and not a motion design software, or vice versa.
Or I was hey, did you know that you can apply unique feathers to different edges of a mask? Someone who's been using the program as long as me is what? what do you mean? I was yeah, that's a new feature that you could do. Oh, I had no idea because it's not important to my workflow at all. So I think the big thing about basics is so kind of important, just because knowing the interface, knowing your way around, knowing where to find things, and knowing the names of things can really help you to find solutions to problems because you have the nomenclature to continue diving into that space, right? So that's useful. It's many things to many people, and we'll say that everybody's a beginner once. I know it's an intimidating program, but if you take it one bite at a time, eventually you'll eat the whole pie.
Let me also give a good. Obviously, the answer I gave is, not going to be appropriate for everyone, especially financially.
Yeah.
One thing that a lot of people overlook. Adobe has a ton of tutorials about how to use their software.
Right.
They have even added a learn workspace right in the programs. You can obviously go to the Adobe site too, but if you go to your workspaces in After Effects, there is a learn workspace, and it will take you step by step through tutorials of how to use the basics of the software. So I would highly recommend doing those if you're just starting out.
Yeah. And I mean, also shout out to the Learn team, because, I talk to them sometimes and they're trying their best to help people get over the frustrating pain points of the software. And very few people, I think, know that those resources are there. So, also sometimes they link to my stuff. So what goes around is all around.
Yeah.
You're in the right place already. Okay, what else we got? What else we got in the bin here?
Well, we have a couple more talky questions that are a little more about budgeting or balancing time. I don't know. Either of those tickle your fancy?
Let's see. I want to ask you guys. Estimating time. Timeline is nice. You know what? I want to talk about this plugins RE transitions. From Kev. So Kev's asking, where can I get free plugins? I don't know. There's a bunch, but most things that are of substantive use generally have substantive cost. I will say that when you think about plugins for transitions, transitions are often what I think of as the realm of Premiere. Right? When I have to transition from one clip to another, that's the realm of Premiere and the realm of editing, because that is where, I've got these two clips. I'm going to put something in the middle of them, and then we're going to go from one to the other. But there are various packs and kind of like builders. I think there's like a whole genre
Hmm.
of this thing that you'll find like on places like Envato. You'll find this on like various marketplaces. Some people sell them their own way.
Hmm.
I mean, what's interesting about this idea of plugins, I was for the longest time in my career anti-plugin, right? Like I'm kind of notorious for being a real vanilla kind of person in all aspects of my life, but specifically when it comes to plugins, because there's so much that the software can do on its own. Also, I was wicked broke for most of my life. So like having access to these things, you know, we had to figure out how do we do this without, right? And there are so many things that we can do in After Effects without getting extra things simply by leveraging the tools that exist, right? And so, like when we think about, oh, what's a complex transition we can do? I don't know. I can make footage look like it's burning away from the center just by using masks and various noises and various deformers. Because After Effects is kind of like the space where we build that.
Hmm.
That's the way I think of it, right? This is the place where we build the custom things rather than apply the external pre-made thing. I think of Premiere as the realm where we would usually use pre-created, pre-made stuff.
Hmm.
I don't know, like, but that being said, in terms of free resources, there are a lot of great plugins that are at pay what you want
Hmm.
pricing. Now, if you want to pay nothing, that is your prerogative. I would recommend, because a human has spent a lot of great time and there are real people on the other end, give what you can,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
then help out, because, that enables someone to make more things and to keep the ecosystem going. That is the way that we move it all forward.
Hmm.
And quite frankly, I'm not buying a lot of takeout coffee right now, so I have so many toonies to throw around.
Nick Canton just made a couple recommendations, and I agree with these. Ease Copy is name your own price on AE scripts, and Butt Capper, which is one of the best named things, which just gives you easy access to path caps in shape layers from is also free. I mean, there's quite a few free or name your own price things out there.
Yeah.
I think the answer more is which do you need,
Yeah.
because you can spend all day acquiring all these free plugins and free things, but if they're not actually useful to you, then that's sort of meaningless.
Well, it's really interesting, like, yeah, because most plugins are very niche, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got to get Newton. Oh, yeah? Do you do a lot of physics simulators? No. Oh, so what do you need Newton for?
I don't know. It's cool. Looks cool.
Looks cool.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I got to get trap code, right? I got to get that trap code suite. Like, oh, yeah? You doing a lot of particle sim? No. Oh,
And,
okay.
and there's a world where it's like, well, but I want to be learning that. Okay, well then, acquire it and learn it and do that. I will say, almost I think everything on AE scripts has a try option.
Yes.
And like all the trap code stuff has try options. You can work with them and learn them without paying for it yet. And I know that as far as like Premiere transitions, since we were kind of talking about that, you can, if you put free Premiere transition pack or whatever, you'll find endless lists of answers on Google of varying quality.
Yeah.
That's definitely a thing. A lot of like, a lot of people that are knocking stuff out for social media that are maybe more hobbyists or something. There's a lot of stuff that's geared towards them. So there's a lot of free stuff there. But like Evan said, people spend time creating these things, and so that takes a lot of labor and a lot of time, and so it's something that is usually worth asking people $10 for, right?
And I think the other thing that's really interesting is that a lot of things that are freebies or whatever are usually kind of like the entry point, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, I've made these 10 things. They're for free. I got some other stuff. Just sign up for the mailing list, whatever. You'll find if I got cool stuff. So that's kind of how that goes down. I got some questions that I kind of want to save for our lightning round towards the end. So I'm going to start pushing those off to the side.
And if you have other good lightning round questions, this is the time to do it.
If it's like a thing versus another thing, I want to hold on to those. What do we got on here?
Have we spoken publicly about our effects tournament bracket that we want to do? Or is that just a thing we talked about amongst ourselves?
That was a you and I thing, but we're going to be creating, coming up on a later show, it's going to be effects bracket. We're going to fight all the effects against each other, and we're going to determine which one is best, which is best effect. We're going to get there.
I'm going to fight every impulse to qualify all my answers.
That's right. There'll be no qualifying. We're going to go bracket by bracket. We're going to flip a coin. One of us has to defend one of them. We may do it by public vote. I don't know. But what else we got? Do we have any technical things in the bag? Is there anything?
Well, there's one about an audio spectrum effect, but I feel like that maybe deserves a little more than the 2 minutes that we'd probably give it here.
That's true. I don't know. Do you want to stick around? Do you want to go long? Do you have something coming up after this?
Not particularly.
I don't know what your day's like. How about I fire up an After Effects here and we actually
fire it up.
Let's look at the audio spectrum effect.
Is yours gas powered? I think it really depends too on what your end goal is. The built-in like waveform and spectrum effect are good for a lot of things, but they certainly have their limits.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? I'm like, you know what? I need to put audio in here. Let me find some music that we can actually use. Because I got some cool stuff that we can probably drop out. You know me, I love my lo-fi abstract chill hop. That is that's Evan Mix 101 here. Okay, so we're looking at my screen. I've dropped my audio out onto the thing. If we hit LL, we can bring up the waveform so we can actually observe what the waveform is. It looks like this. And there were those two effects, right? It was the audio spectrum is one of them, and then the other one is going to be the audio waveform. So right off the jump, how does this even work? Well, you point it at some audio, and then it starts, doing this. So this is the audio spectrum, which is like a graph. Here, I'm going to try to make this into colors that we can appreciate.
Hot pink and bright green.
Those are probably the best starting color.
Always.
The After Effects team did us a good service by putting those as the default. So yeah, we end up with these things. But again, so these are really what you can change about what's going on in here, right? So when we try to display this, it ends up like this. Wow, I just set them to black and it turned into that. Oh, self. Don't do it like that. Oh, boy. All right, let's put it back. Oh, boy. I'm getting silly here at the end of the show, Kyle. Things are getting weird. So
we're pretty silly at the start, to be fair.
That's true. So, if we take the softness down to none, it still looks like this. What am I looking at here? What am I doing? We got our thickness. We got our softness. Have I done something horrible to my layer? What did I do?
I don't know. I'm mostly watching you on a delay like everyone else, so it's hard for me to know.
So there are various things that we can mess with, right? So we can mess with the maximum height, but all of this is really just messing with the graph. Now, the question was, how do we make this good? How do I take this and make something good out of it? Because on its own, this is not a great driver. This is a great element. This could be something interesting, but what do we layer onto this? The best way to think about this is to think about this as like your starting geometry, and then we're going to layer more effects on top of it. There we go. So, for example, like if we wanted to make something marginally more interesting with this, then we would probably want to think about, maybe we would blur it. We maybe work with the shape. You want to make sure that this is becoming the shape you want, but then you would probably start layering things on, just like some glows, right? Do I have deep glow on here? No. Let's see. Glow, star glow. Which glows do I even have loaded into this thing? Oh boy.
You tell me.
Yeah, I know. What is happening with this? What is this? I don't think that's going to get me where I want. This is what happens when I try to do things like just off the dome, Okay. So you notice that, now we got a slightly glowing thing. That's fine. There are actually a couple of tutorials on this very channel about these particular effects. But the idea is like what we start layering onto it is what is going to change whether or not this is good or bad. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if this is our base geometry, let's see, we can increase the intensity, we can increase the radius, we can make something interesting like that. But you could wrap this around a line, you can make this go around a circle, you could mosaic, you could start cramming like a mosaic on top of this. I don't know why I also brought a tritone on. What is happening, Kyle? I am losing it today.
And I think maybe just a good general note is like, don't be afraid to just slam some random effects together sometimes and see what happens. Play around with it.
So like, here we go. Boop. Now we're getting a real Minecraft vibe out of this, right? So, you know, it really depends on what look you want to do. When the idea is like, oh, I want to make something interesting. Well, what's interesting about it? Is it that we break it up into many forms of the spectrum? Is it that we start putting things like colorama on here? Like, it's all about layering and making something maybe better than it was originally, because the original versions of audio spectrum and audio waveform are very underwhelming, right? Like, oh, a bunch of dots. What is this crap with the dots? Get out of here. This doesn't even look like the thing that I see on a radio, you know? And the other thing I'm going to say about using these, pay attention to these frequency bands. So how many bands, and then the start and end frequencies. So Kyle, you and I were talking about this stuff because, you know, we do podcast, and the human voice is at a certain frequency. So if you're dealing with audio that's the human voice and you're asking to look at ranges well beyond human frequencies, you're going to end up with big flat sections that are unexciting to look at. And, you know, then you need to narrow it down and only focus on what's good. So that's kind of my advice on using those things. Let's go back to the heads. Oh, boy, I didn't anticipate how hungry I would be at this time of the day.
I think maybe if you have, this was Charles, right? Yeah. If you maybe have like a specific look that you're after or something, we might be able to, you know, revisit that and give a very pointed answer on how you would do that. But
that's true.
Yeah, I agree with the overall thought that it's like, it's a generator, and then what you do with it beyond that is kind of dependent on what you need it to do.
All right. What else we got in here? There were some questions about some biz stuff, about estimating the length of time to complete a project. There's actually a video on this channel that I would recommend checking out about that, where we talk about budgeting and stuff. Kyle, what's your method for estimating time on a project?
I mean, I'd say my short answer is that I still I keep track of my time on every project that I do, mostly for myself, so that I know. You know, I'm always able to refine more and more. Like if someone says, hey, you know, what are you going to charge me for a 90-second explainer video? I already know right off the bat, like I have a price range. It's going to depend a lot on like, well, am I designing the thing as well? Am I helping write it? But, you know, how complex is the look? Those are the variables that really help you dial it in. But like, I could tell you right off the bat, like it's probably going to be between this and this. Just because I know the amount of time that it's going to take me, because I've done several and I've kept track of all of them. So if you're not tracking your time on your projects, I highly recommend doing that, because then you can just figure out, you know, pretty easily, like, well, if I spent 40 hours building the thing and this is the hourly rate that I make or want to be making, like you have an answer there. Yeah. Then you need to build in your expenses and, you know, profit and stuff like that. It's,
yeah,
you know.
I think what's interesting is that figuring out pricing for this service is no different than any other service. It's the same way we price out how much it'll cost to build someone's fence, how much it'll cost to build someone's car, right? Like, how long will it take you to fix the car? Well, let's see, 10 hours of labor, ergo this much per hour of labor, this much per parts. There you go. So you end up with that. So
he specifically called out, you know, figuring out a timeline is tough, but if you kept track of how many hours it takes, then you know exactly what your timeline is.
Yeah.
If you can figure out, you know, how many of those hours you're actually able to do per day and what the turnaround time on like client feedback and stuff is. Again, there's lots of variables, but
yeah, and I think a lot of it comes with experience, right? If this is the first one, then how do we know for the first one? But yeah, definitely being analytical about your time, how much do you spend on this, and breaking things down into small bits, right?
Yep.
Like this part of the process will probably take da 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 da, right? And then we get into talking about like overages and when it's done, that kind of thing. Like, oh, but I think I could if I could just cram 2 more hours, but when the budget is 6 hours, at 6 hours you're done. So
Yep.
that's that is a hard thing to work out over time. But there was a question here that was about hand drawn and anime stuff. I threw
Mhm.
that in. You're looking to do things that are like hand drawn traditional anime in After Effects. If you're talking about traditional forms, we're talking pose to pose, we're talking straight ahead, we're talking about how you do it on Nickelodeon and Disney shows. They'll tell you that you want to be using things like Harmony Toon Boom. You want to be using things like Moho. But if you're in the Adobe ecosystem, you are going to want to look at Adobe Animate, Adobe CC Animate, because it
Formerly known
has
as Flash.
right, aka Flash, because it has that frame to frame tabbing back and forth. It's designed for that onion skinning look. There are tools you can graft into Photoshop that you can do it that way. But when we're talking about, I'm going to draw each frame, I'm going to do various passes, that workflow, those traditional workflows and those traditional methodologies are better served by programs that are purpose built for that. Because there's an entire industry and stream dedicated to traditional animation in that way. Now, there are also programs that are actually quite cheap in that. I think there are some that are actually like free that enable that kind of thing. But like I said, if you're already in the Adobe ecosystem, look into CC Animate, look into what you can graft into Photoshop. So check those out. And I will say that traditional animation, it's like being an illustrator, but 24 times a second. Or like 12 times a second or 8 times a second. It's work in passes. Take it easy and be kind to yourself as you delve into that process. But yeah, what else we got here?
I mean, we could probably lightning around a couple of these. They're answers that we could both opine on for
Right. Let's slam
long
it.
amounts of time. Yeah.
Slam them.
Slam them.
We're going to snap into a Slim Jim. Let's do it. Bake Like a Pro.
Yeah.
He's from Ottawa. He's just across the river in Gatineau. So I did want to address his question, asking about why a layer in After Effects we can push off of After Effects to the left, right? So, what is he talking about with that? Well, any layer in After Effects we can push.
Before zero.
Yeah. So like here's 0, and I can just grab my layer and I can push it that way, right? But in Premiere, you can't. There's a wall in Premiere. You can't go any further that way. Now, there's a few reasons, technically speaking, why we can do this, because check this out. If I go here, beginning, ending, and I trim the comp to this work area, I'm creating a composition that's now this big, right? But that information, I could have keyframe information that lives over here. Trimming the comp shouldn't destroy that information. We need to keep it. So that's one of the reasons that we non-destructively do things this way. For me, because After Effects is my first and truest love, when I go into Premiere, I become incredibly frustrated when there's a wall there. I'm like, what is wrong with this program? It's virtual. It's not a real film strip, because... And even if it was a real film strip, I would just be taping more film onto the front of it.
Yeah.
So I can't really say why Premiere has the wall, but I can say that why we don't have it in After Effects is because it's virtual, it's non-destructive, and you're meant to be able to slip layers forward and backward to make nudging and adjustments. The concept of permanence is less important to After Effects methodologically. And at a kind of high level, because everything needs to stay fluid so that you can adjust and tweak and do things on the fly. So,
And the trade-off for that is that it's more complex to learn.
yeah, that it becomes more nebulous, and it's a little bit like surfing. You just kind of gotta stay loose with it. And the big thing is that I find it more useful, right? Because the way I work, I'm like, these keyframes, this whole layer. Shift. If there was a wall and I had to check if it was going to bump into the wall 50 times, I'd lose my mind.
Well, your brain is, barely tethered to reality as it is. So I think that makes sense for you.
I know. I mean, it could fly apart at any moment, Kyle. Really, just that I perceive marginally a slight overlap with the same reality you do is really amazing. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on that. But let's lightning round this stuff. Let's smash it. Okay, what do you got? Hit me.
There was a little bit of discussion, Duick versus rubber hose for character animation. I just thought I'd call that out too because the chat talked through it. But what are your quick thoughts?
For the whole character, if you want to animate that whole character, it's got to be Duick. However, I had to use Duick on a project recently. That bad boy will stank up your timeline with a lot of expressions. So if it's significantly complex, probably Duick. However, rubber hose, so light, so clean, so nice.
Only works for certain looks, though. It's as most of our answers boil down to, it depends on what you need it to do.
Right. And the other thing is that you can graft in. I think rubber hose has a way you can work with puppet pins as well. I think, or maybe that's Limber I'm thinking of. Oh boy, so many.
Right.
Kyle, what's your vote?
I would say Duick because it does a lot of things. It's useful for a lot of stuff. You can use it for straight up artwork, for puppet pins. Plus, it has a bunch of other built-in stuff that has nothing to do with character animation that may just be useful.
Yeah.
But the trade-off is that there's a ton of stuff in there, and it takes longer to learn. Rubber hose, I think if you're doing that kind of stuff, like you get bendy things and you can move the bendy limbs. And I think rubber hose is very straightforward.
Yep.
It's not for everything.
Exactly. Boom. Okay, nailed it.
Boom.
Crushed it.
All right. This could maybe be one we do real quick.
Okay.
Nick says, maybe a dumb question. Any good strategies for zooming in and out when working with bitmaps? Just double the size and resolution of the original bitmaps in order to maintain resolution? ?
Yes. I would say if you know you're going to scale it up big, I scale it up in Photoshop because it scales better.
There is, however, just to point this out, it's not going to show up well here.
Oh, I got your screen.
Yeah. This little thing right here, it's not going to work here, but there are actually some options on certain layers. Text layers won't have it because it's already a vector layer. There are some, you'll get kind of a little curvy version here. There are times where that, may actually be better. But I mean, really, anytime you're upscaling pixels, you're going to hit a wall because they're pixels. So yeah, I mean, really, the best thing is just to try to make it as big originally as you can.
Yeah. Now we are breaking a lot of barriers with artificial intelligence, scaling things up, adding pixels, figuring it out. However, at a certain point, artifacts, oopsie. All right, next.
Let's see. Evan, where do you get your art for the Renaissance rototype animation?
Oh, Wikipedia. Or archive.org.
Because everyone who made them is dead, so they don't own the rights anymore.
Yeah, come fight me, Rembrandt. What are you going to do to me, Van Gogh? You already cut your own ear off. Dingus.
Let's see. So we've got two kind of squishy questions. Let's just pick one of those to maybe send us out.
Okay.
Let's see. Juliana asked, how do you balance work and passion projects, especially if the freelance you have are not interesting or challenging, but are time consuming? Good question. I'll let you know if I ever figure it out.
My passion died a long time ago. No. The interesting thing about that for me is that the joy that I get from the job, look, I'm a real lame person. I'm a certified non-artist over here. And the kind of joy that I get from a project is also often derived from the service aspect and less about the final product aspect, because I look at most of these things as a puzzle that we're trying to work through. However, there are a lot of creative outputs in terms of balancing raw time in the day. Then you're talking about what do you sacrifice in your life to make room for things. If you've ever watched an interview with great Canadian author Margaret Atwood, she will tell you that to produce art, you must be selfish. and all art is particularly selfish in the way that they all demand your time more than anything else. Now that's her perspective on things. I say try to build in a schedule and work within your means. But there's definitely those two perspectives that you're gonna have to start making cuts somewhere, because we only have so much time in our lives, in our days. So we have to do things to live, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's sometimes that means scaling back and paring down and treating your passion project the same way you would treat a client project, with time budget, with resource budget. So that's, yeah.
If it's too nebulous, you'll never get to it.
Yeah.
I think another answer too, which, you know, is easier said than done, but on sort of a longer scale, like if you're doing a bunch of stuff that is time consuming and not exciting, maybe think about starting to charge more for that, so that you have to do a little bit less of it and start having more free time. Like, I know, you know, that's not a switch you can flip, and that's not something that's always possible, but, you know, maybe look at analyzing, like, how much time am I spending on these things, and am I really getting the value out of it? Is this something that I could, you know, subcontract out to someone else to do part of, or could I just do less of this, find another similar client with bigger budgets? Like,
yeah. And are there systems to automate the areas of things that you find laborious? Like, the work of work is developing systems that make work easier. Like, that's the work of work. And you know, when we're working our work, it works. Okay, is that the end of our?
Yeah, let's call that. We got a couple things that we can maybe keep in our pocket for next week here.
Okay. Sweet.
Oh, speaking of next week.
Yeah.
Boom.
Hey. Speaking of next week, Kyle and I are going to talk over each other ad nauseum.
We will be having a guest with us next week.
Guest.
And she's right here in the chat.
Yeah, that's right. Ray
Cook.
Oh,
Boom.
We just said that at the same time.
Official announcement. See, we didn't even talk over each other. We did it together.
That's how we do it. But yeah, I'm really excited to have Ray on. If you are not familiar with her works, we should post up some links to her Instagram and stuff in the chat now. So we're going to be talking to her about, you know, how she does the stuff, you know, how her process works. We try to keep it pretty technical on here, so you're gonna see how someone else does their work, and you know, we're gonna make it go. And you know, we're really excited to, I don't know, to see like to get like a fresh voice on here, especially that's not like Evan and Kyle. We need a buffer.
Yeah.
We're getting cabin fever here.
Sorry, Ray. It's going to have to be you for at least an hour.
Ray, tell Kyle, because I'm not speaking to... Okay.
Yeah, she's already regretting agreeing to this, I'm sure.
Sorry, you're locked in. It's going to happen. We're going to call you anyway. Yeah, it's going to be great. But yeah, that's coming up next week. If you have questions and quandaries, big long form ones, please use the form in the description. And in particular, if you have questions for Ray, put those in the form.
Yeah.
Because that's where we want to collect them. We want to make sure that we've got a bunch of audience sourced questions on that topic that we can get to her early. 'Cause we don't engage in gotcha journalism here. That's not how we do it. Or maybe we do. Maybe we pivot into that
Exclusively.
Thinking about it. Anyway, I think that's it for us. You know, I'm getting loopy because my blood sugar is low because I did not eat enough lunch. So, Kyle, where can people find out more about you?
You can find me on Twitter at KylosaurusRex. You can find me at KyleHamrick.com. Other places, but those are easy. So there you go.
Awesome. You can find me on this channel at EC Abrams, Instagram, Twitter. Those are the places. Thank you again for hanging out with us in the chat and spending some time with us here on Friday. And thank you for all your questions. They were wonderful. And hopefully we were helpful. But yeah, that's it for now. Time to roll that exit slide when I press
roll it.
button.